Hello, my name's Karen Griffin, and I'm the project manager for the flooding and drainage study for the village of Sargent. I'm here today with Carrie Romero, who's the project engineer, and we're here to give you an update on the project, to give you some examples of the alternatives that we've evaluated, as well as give you some of the recommendations that we're making to help relieve the flooding and the water table issues that are plaguing the village of Sargent. For the agenda today, what we're going to do is go over briefly the project status, give you an idea of where we are at, describe the two evaluations that we've completed, the groundwater evaluation to look at ways to lower the water table and the recommendations that we have for that. As well as for the surface water, we've got some alternatives that we looked at to evaluate flood reduction alternatives, as well as the recommendations for that. At the end, I'm going to give you an opportunity to write down the ways that you can provide questions and comments on this presentation and the next steps for the process. At this point, the project has completed all of the hydrologic data and stormwater data evaluation. We've completed groundwater and surface water models to evaluate different alternatives and their effects on flooding and water table issues that, as I said, that plague the city. We have had one public meeting, and we were glad to see the attendance at the meeting. We got a lot of information. Unfortunately, for this second public meeting, we're doing this online because of the COVID-19 directives across the state. At this point, we've also provided in this presentation some conceptual project designs on some of the alternatives that we will be presenting in our final report. And so the final portion of this project is to prepare that report, and that will include the alternatives, the best alternatives for funding options for the different projects that we're proposing. Again, I just want to thank many of you for attending the public meeting we had. We took note and listened and read all of the comments that were submitted in writing, as well as many of the comments that we took down during the meeting itself. We identified the problems in the area in town. We also took note of that information and used it to verify the models that we developed for groundwater evaluations and surface water evaluations. So again, we really appreciate all the outreach that we've gotten from you all, providing that information. It really helped in detailing the information that we needed to do these analyses accurately. So let's start with the groundwater evaluation. What we prepared for evaluating the ways to lower the water table elevation in town was we prepared a groundwater model that encompassed more than just the city. It did an area including the Middle Loop River and up into the uplands to the north. What we evaluated were two alternatives that we came up with to potentially lower the water table in town. One of them was to line the surface water canals that exist to the north, along the uplands here, right along the edge of town, as you know, on the north end of town. And then the other option was to convert cropland around town from surface water to groundwater irrigation. And I'll give you a little more detail on that right here. This illustrates the two options that we looked at in the groundwater modeling evaluation. We looked at lowering the groundwater by lining segments of the Sargent irrigation canal along north of town, as I said. There were about 4.5 miles of irrigation canal that we evaluated lining with concrete, and this was to minimize the amount of seepage and thus reduce the water table in this area and hopefully affect the town to the south. The second evaluation that we did was to convert surface water irrigation north of town from surface water to groundwater by installing new groundwater wells. And to evaluate these two alternatives, we used a groundwater model we had developed. And this slide shows the results of those two groundwater model simulations. On the left here is the first alternative, which was lining those surface water canals. And as you can see, this map illustrates in pink, in darker shades of pink to red, the depth of water reduced by lining those canals. And as you can see, up along the canal itself, you would see the greatest effect where water table was reduced by 15 feet. So it was 15 feet lower than the original conditions, which is fantastic. The problem is that that effect did not reach town until about 10 years after those canals had been lined. And the only amount of water table lowering was about 1 foot. On the second illustration here, we see what the effects of converting about 1,200 acres of agricultural land from surface water to groundwater. And the effects were greater. What we found were that in town, we could see a water table lowering of up to 7 feet after 5 years. Specifically on the north end of town, you could see that. So the effects of changing the conversion was greater than what was seen by lining the canals. So the alternative that we brought forward was the second one. So our recommendation for lowering the groundwater table in the town of Sargent was to proceed with the irrigation conversion option. To do this, we proposed that the community and as well the NRD work to identify willing participants. That meaning agricultural producers to the north, northeast, and west of town that would be willing to convert their surface water irrigation to groundwater irrigation. That would require as well working with the NRD on the permitting and/or transfer requirements that would be essential to getting that transfer completed. I did want to mention that we did evaluate the cost alternatives, the cost of the two alternatives, and the cost to line 4.5 miles of irrigation canal with concrete was roughly $300,000 to $350,000, and the cost to convert the irrigation from surface water to groundwater was less and will depend on the number of actual new wells that are needed, because as I said before, there are some backup wells that are in the area right now, and some of the areas would not need a new irrigation well to complete this conversion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Romero, who will talk about the surface water alternatives that were evaluated and the recommendations we have for them.
Evaluation of the surface water drainage within the town of Sargent followed 3 basic steps. The first being identifying the drainages that contribute to flooding. We did that through feedback received at our first public meeting, data that we received through the NRD as well as the Sargent Irrigation District, and also topographic data that it was from 2018 that allowed us to delineate the contributing drainage areas. And from that point, we could complete the hydrologic and hydraulic analysis that modeled flow in the community. The second step was to evaluate alternatives to reduce flooding. And then the third step is recommend a specific set of alternatives based on several different criteria, which included the flood reduction area, the amount of land acquisition required, the total project cost, and ultimately the benefit cost ratio, which measures the benefits of the project against the project's cost. We delineated a contributing drainage area at Sargent of about 5.1 square miles. The runoff from this drainage area enters the community via 3 main drainage paths. The first being on the east side of town, where water enters east of Highway 183 and flows through the Trotter facility. Right now it ends up at the pump location that is near Howard and Della Street. From there, it is pumped south and ultimately gravity drains further south, dead ending in an area near the river, but never truly making it all the way. There's the central drainage path through town, where flow enters the community from the north as well, and flows south, ultimately in a drainage ditch parallel to Broadway Street until it rejoins the river. A third drainage path is at the west side of town along West Main Street, where a small localized drainage area combines with overflow from Sand Canyon and results in flooding issues for residents in that part of the community. After completing the drainage area delineation seen on the previous slide, we were able to complete the hydrologic and hydraulic analysis of flooding in the community of Sargent. The map on this slide shows the 10-year and 100-year floodplain in the community. Our analysis showed that there is extremely limited capacity for the main drainage path through the middle of town, as well as the path east of Highway 183. You can see by the chart on the lower right side of the slide that the existing ditch capacity in the center of town is limited to about 80 cubic feet per second. The 2-year flood event is about 95 cubic feet per second, and the 10 and 100-year flood events far exceed the capacity of that ditch. Our existing conditions analysis also showed that the Main Street flooding seen on the west side of town is likely greatly influenced by Sand Canyon and the hydrology and hydraulics of that drainage way. The localized drainage that drains south to Main Street in that area does not result in enough runoff to match the conditions that were observed during the 2019 floods last year. We looked at a number of alternatives to analyze their impact on the flooding conditions within the community of Sargent. A few of them were eliminated for various reasons. We looked at excavating a larger channel through the center of town that would accommodate flows up to the 100-year event, but found that a channel that size would require the acquisition of a lot of private property and may require the movement or demolition of several structures. For this reason, that alternative was cast aside. We also eliminated the replacement of the pump at Howard and Della Street. We found that although we tried looking at open ditch drainage or replacing the pump with culverts, flooding conditions were not improved due to a high tailwater condition at the culvert outlet and the fact that a defined drainage channel does not exist upstream of the proposed culverts. We did find that moving the project forward will probably require 2 phases of construction. The first phase would be drainage improvements to the central drainage in the middle of town, increasing the capacity of the existing culverts by replacement or addition. This would provide protection from the small frequent events that the community has experienced over the last few years. Phase 2 would provide protection from the large events, and this would take the form of either detention north of town or a diversion channel. A combination of these alternatives are required in order to achieve the 100-year level of protection. Phase 1 of a drainage improvement project would include the replacement of several of the drainage structures on the central drainage through town. These would be the structures at Edith Street, the pipe currently at Della Street, the culverts that are located at Anna Street, and the culverts at Jesse Street. The map that you see on this slide shows the 10-year floodplain. The light gray is existing conditions. The blue is the conditions after replacement of the structures identified. The key thing to remember is that phase 1 would reduce street and property flooding for frequent precipitation events, the 2 to 10-year event. This is the first phase in protecting the community against the 100-year flood. This slide shows the preliminary cost estimate for the phase 1 drainage improvements in the community. You can see the total project cost at the very bottom of the table. The benefits of phase 1 are that it would significantly reduce flooding for frequent events. There would be no land acquisition required, and it would eliminate frequent standing water and icing problems that had been noted frequently in the community. Drawbacks are that it does not protect against the 100-year event on its own, and it does not eliminate inundation in all areas. Phase 2 of the drainage improvements would be a project that would protect the community from the 100-year flood event. In order to protect Sargent from the 100-year flood event, a second phase must be combined with phase 1, which was previously discussed. The first option for phase 2 is the addition of regional detention north of town. This would intercept flow before it reached the community and detain it for slow release over time. The map shown on this slide is the 100-year floodplain map. The light gray is the existing conditions, with the darker blue being the proposed conditions. Please note that this is the 100-year floodplain, whereas on the last slide, we were discussing a more frequent event, the 10-year event. This slide shows the preliminary cost estimate for option A of phase 2. The benefits of the project would be reduction of peak discharges associated with the 100-year event by 42% through the center of town. It would remove a large segment of the community from the 100-year floodplain. The drawbacks are the requirement of land acquisition for the detention, the risk of 100-year flood remains in parts of the community, and this must be combined with phase 1 in order to see the benefits shown on the map. Option B for the phase 2 drainage improvements consists of the construction of a diversion channel around town. This channel would intercept runoff before it entered the community and divert it to the east and to the south. The channel alignment is proposed in green on this map. It would have to pass under Highway 183 via a set of box culverts and again under East Main Street under another set of culverts. Further south, a canal siphon would be required before it could reach the Middle Loop River. Again, this map shows in light gray what the floodplain is under existing conditions for the 100-year event. The darker blue represents what the anticipated floodplain would be with a diversion channel in place. This slide summarizes the preliminary cost of the option B phase 2 diversion channel. The benefits of the channel would be that it removes the 100-year floodplain from the majority of the town. It would also minimize the need for the pump that is currently at Howard and Dulles Street by diverting water away from that part of town. The drawbacks would be the requirement for land acquisition and the impacts to those landowners. This project must also be combined with phase 1 in order to see the full benefits. And this project results in the highest anticipated cost. This slide summarizes the costs of the three alternatives that we just discussed. At the bottom, you can see the combined cost of the drainage improvements of phase 1 with the regional detention of phase 2 or the diversion channel of phase 2. In the far right column is a preliminary benefit cost ratio. A number above 1 indicates that the cost of the project is less than the benefits it provides. A number of 1.0 or greater is required in order for a project to qualify for most grant funds that are available. As a result of the benefit cost analysis as well as the improvements in the floodplain, we recommend that the community pursue the phase 1 drainage improvements along with a diversion channel in order to protect from the 100-year flood event. As a result of our analysis, we recommend the community pursue a phased project approach, with phase 1 being improvements to the drainage structures along the center of town, and phase 2 being the construction of a diversion channel to intercept runoff and divert it to the east and south of the community. In addition to these projects, we recommend the community consider developing a stormwater master plan. A stormwater master plan is an opportunity to develop a detailed inventory of drainage structures throughout the community, outside of those main drainage paths that were discussed in this presentation. It is a way to record current drainage issues and help shape and prioritize smaller projects, which might include drainage culverts that have inadequate capacity, or even the issue with the Sand Canyon overflow and the need for a structure to convey that runoff south of Main Street. This slide summarizes a number of different funding opportunities for the type of surface water project we are proposing. At this time, we are still researching which fund may be the best match for the projects in Sargent. A recommendation on funding options and alternatives to be pursued will be included in the final report that is part of this study.
Thank you, Carrie. All right, so that concludes our presentation on the flood and drainage study for the City of Sargent, and we want to thank you for listening and hope that you have seen that there are some alternatives that are viable for lowering the water table as well as reducing the flooding in town. If you have any questions or comments on this presentation, we ask that you contact Brian at the Lower Loop NRD, Brian Kolar. His email address is briank@llnrd.org, or his phone number is 308-728-3221. Again, we appreciate all the input that we received from you all and hope that our presentation brings some insight in how to alleviate the flooding and water table issues that are plaguing the village of Sargent.